Hey friends, and welcome back to another episode of Thriving Thoughts. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry. I'm sitting in my office right now in the dark recording this episode because I have a little tiny mini Christmas tree lit up, and sometimes that little mini Christmas tree helps me to feel like I'm not so alone. And you'll be hearing this episode within minutes, literally, of me recording it. It's nighttime outside. It's a time when, for many of us, we can feel very alone. So I wanted to share a little message with you, and I have got to tell you, I have been hindered at every corner as I attempt to share this message. In fact, I literally almost just took my headphones off, put them on the desk, and walked out because my computer rebooted and decided to do updates, preventing me from recording this message to you. Right now, I've got things popping up on my screen, but I will not be deterred, my friends, because you need to hear this message. I have a question for you. Are you alone tonight? Are you feeling alone? You know, those two things are synonymous. I know what it's like to feel alone and physically be alone. I also know what it's like to feel alone and be physically surrounded with other people. I bet if you're listening to this, you do too. And my message today is simply this: be careful, little thoughts, what you believe when you are alone. And when I say you are alone, that means if you're feeling alone, either if you're with somebody or not, it doesn't matter. If you're feeling alone, be careful, little thoughts, what you believe. Many of you might be familiar with that old song that says, "Be careful, little eyes, what do you see? Be careful, little eyes, what you see." You know that song? It goes on to say, "For the Father up above is looking down with love. Be careful, little eyes, what you see." Very often we think about the things outside of us and what we see, what we hear. It's a very nice message, and it's one that sometimes I believe we misinterpret to believe that the Father up above is looking down in love with a hammer, ready to strike us down because we're seeing or thinking or feeling or surrounding ourselves with certain things, and that's not the case. See, the Father up above, if you don't know him, that's okay. That's not what this message is about. But he loves you, whether you know it or not. He loves you, and he sees you in your aloneness, and he's not looking on you to drop a hammer on you. He's looking at you to say, be careful what you believe. Believe what he believes about you, which is you are treasured, you are beloved, you are divinely crafted. You were formed long before your parents ever even thought about having you or making you. He knew who you would be. He knew every mistake you would make. He knew every fear you would have. He knew every moment and knows right now those moments when you're feeling alone. You know, I didn't plan on saying any of that, but here we are in the dark in my office. I'm talking to you. Maybe you're sitting on your couch at home. Maybe you're laying in bed. Maybe you're sitting outside, even though it's cold, just because it feels good to feel alive, to have the cold breath of the breeze on you. I'm with you, my friends, and I must share with you that when you are feeling alone, it's real. It's a real feeling. You know, there's a lot of messages out there where people say, you are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. It sure doesn't feel that way sometimes. Isn't that right, friends? It sure feels like we're all alone, even if we're surrounded by people. There are those moments. And I think the reason that we feel that way is because of the space up in our head, behind our eyes, above our throats, right? That brain, that space where all of those thoughts take place. I was talking with a friend today, and I told her, I shared with her that I was in a dark headspace a couple of days ago. It was one that frightened me a little, if I'm honest with you, because it reminded me of where I used to be constantly. And my friends, that's what happens in our thought worlds. Those old thought habits reemerge when we least expect them to. In fact, I was in such a dark place, thinking so negatively about myself and my life, that I kind of opened that door. I opened that door to those thoughts and I entertained them. In fact, one morning as I was getting ready to get into the shower, I looked in the mirror and I spoke to myself like I was nothing. In fact, I said, "You're nothing. You don't matter." And I looked myself in the eyes. Have you ever been there? My hunch is you have. And why do I share that? Sometimes people say, "Dr. Sherry, you shouldn't share such things." You know what? If I don't, shame on me. Because that, my friends, is the reason we feel so alone. Because nobody's talking about those dark spaces in our minds. And listen, I've learned over the years as a thriving thoughts expert, not because my thoughts are always thriving, but because I know how to speak truth over them. I know how to recognize when they are lies, and I know how to recognize when they are not good for me. So even though I spoke that to myself in the mirror, I immediately said, "No, that's a lie. The truth is, Sherry, you are beloved and you matter." And my friends, I didn't believe that at the moment. Sometimes you get so deep in those thoughts, in those fears that rest in the deep recesses of your mind, and they keep coming back. The ones I'm talking about. I don't know what they are for you, but you do. My friends, that's what makes us feel alone. And we feel even more alone when we don't share those thoughts with somebody. Look, they're real. It feels real when they're happening. I'm here to plead with you. Be careful, little thoughts, what you believe. You see, sometimes if we don't give them a voice, if we don't share them with a friend, if we don't share them with somebody who we know loves us unconditionally, and maybe for you, the only person in your life that you believe loves you unconditionally is God, I invite you to talk with him. It's just a conversation. There's nothing fancy that needs to happen. Just talk. He'll hear you. But if you do have somebody physically in your life that you trust, I invite you to connect with them. Right now we're in a time where connection is scarce. We're warned to stay home and not spread this virus, right? And for many of us, that's okay because we have our family at home. And yet for many of us, we don't. And even for those many more of us who have families at home, yet we feel trapped in a prison. Maybe it's a prison of abuse, disregard. Maybe you feel invisible. My friends, I hear you. I see you. And can I invite you to this truth? Share that truth that I spoke over to myself the other day, which is you are beloved and you matter. My friends, be careful, little thoughts, what you believe. I say time and again that we can't control the thoughts that come into our minds, but we can control how wide we open the door, and we can control what we do with those thoughts. If you're finding yourself looking in the mirror today saying degrading, demeaning things to yourself, will you please call yourself to task? Will you please call those thoughts for what they are, that they're lies? Do not believe them. Do not give in to the temptation to believe them as truth. Be careful, little thoughts, what you believe. I'll reiterate this. There's this hashtag going around since the global pandemic started, hashtag alone together. If you're feeling alone, whether you're physically alone or not, if you're feeling alone, you know that to be so far from the truth for you. Alone together, you ask? Who am I alone together with? I believe that God has the power to unite our spirits, those of us who are lonely in spirit. He has the power to unite us. And I hope that in sharing my alone spaces with you and how I am choosing to be careful, little thoughts, what I believe, and sharing with you the raw truth of what some of those thoughts are, I hope that you don't feel so alone tonight. I pray that our hearts are uniquely connected. I posted something on Facebook the other day that said, "My heart beats for those who are alone, truly alone." And I mean that, my friends. So much so, in fact, that I've decided to dedicate the entire 4th season of this podcast to those who are alone and who are still choosing to thrive. That's right, my friends. It's a possibility. I'll be having interviews with people who feel alone, who are alone, people like you. In fact, why don't you reach out to me if you have a story to share about how you have been careful, oh, little thoughts, what you believe, and how you've chosen to grow through and in the face of the adversity of feeling alone. Reach out to me. You can message me on Facebook or Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. You can email me. I want to hear from you. I'd love to talk with you about sharing your story because look, the more we share those thoughts, those little thoughts that we have in our minds, the less they have the power to become reality, the less they have the power for us to believe them as truth. The more we call them lies, the more we share them with other people, it unites our spirits. And my friends, I believe that when that happens, those alone spaces, they might still come. But then we will really be thriving together, connected together, no longer alone together, thriving together. If you're feeling alone tonight, I encourage you to reach out to somebody, even if that somebody is me. And I mean that in all sincerity. Let's thrive together, and let's together be careful little thoughts, what we believe. Be sure to tune in on Sunday, my friends. This is the perfect segue, believe it or not. And I didn't plan on it. That's just how this happens. My friend Luann Nuss, who's on the front lines of a suicide prevention hotline in New South Wales, Australia, is joining me on Sunday. And she even talks about just how much people feel alone. You are going to want to tune in to that episode on Sunday. And that is, in fact, the final interview for Season 3. Until then, my friends, speak truth over the lies so you can thrive.